Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Tefertiller, and thank you for joining us our podcast, the Service Management Leadership Podcast. Today's our first guest. It's Kat Macdermid, KatrinaMacdermid.com. And so she's a ITIL 4 master, author, has a great podcast of her own in the service management world. It's really good. I've listened to several of her podcasts with, I'll let her talk about some of her recent guests, but I was so excited that she was allowed us the privilege of being our first guest on this podcast. So welcome, Kat. Thank you for gracing us.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And I'm honored to be your first guest on your podcast. Very, very honored indeed.
Thank you. I'm excited. So who have you had on as recent guests? Let's talk about some of your podcasts and some of your recent guests.
Sure. So I wanted to approach this a little bit differently, and it was a strategic move. I wanted to speak to the C-level suite of organizations. I think, in my humble opinion, as you mentioned, I'm an ITIL master, and I think we focus on the wrong level of people sometimes. And when I say wrong, I don't mean that that's a bad thing, but I believe ITIL needs to come more from a leadership perspective. And again, in my opinion, we tend to focus on IT folk in operations. And I'm in operations, I'm not in the C-suite. And as much as we love what we do and we try our damnness to make good service, if we don't have the support and understanding of leadership, we're really not set up for success. So that was one of the main catalysts of targeting C-levels. And if I can be perfectly honest to you and to your listeners, they have the money.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And, to invest in good service and to improve, it takes money. And that was, as I said, my main catalyst for interviewing the C-level suite. I've been really lucky to have the type of people I have. My first guest was Marco Bill Peter from Red Hat. Mm-hmm. Quite an interesting story, Jeffrey, because I actually didn't realize how senior and well-known Marco was. And little cheeky old me from Australia just emailed Marco. I'd actually met him in Munich last year at a conference. We were both speakers. And what I've found out from Marco and from all the guests I've interviewed is how very generous they are with their time. And not only their time, but they're really coaching me and guiding me to my journey. And that's just been incredible. And I say that with all sincerity, how terrific my guests have been. And David Ratcliffe from Pink Elephant, who you know, mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, what an amazing story he has to tell, or many stories. Completely enjoyed that, it seemed like a very short 30 minutes with David. And I loved how David shared his personal journey, talking about his family and his father. And I believed him that he believes in not taking shortcuts. He's not interested in short-term wins. And I think that this is a thing, our listeners can learn from, because I certainly learned also. I've also had the opportunity to interview Peter McDonald from Qantas. Again, terrific. I actually know Pete personally and professionally. And again, shared some amazing insights. And Pete, I think I got the most from was his passion for people, for leadership, diversity within the workplace. Yeah, so it's been an amazing journey, Jeffrey. But as you will find out, it's not just a matter of pressing the record button when you do podcasts. There's a heck of a lot of work that goes in the background. A lot of work.
I'm learning that quickly. And so just putting out the intro, and you mentioned the story of David. And so the funny story that I picked up with him and his father, his parents he was from the Great Britain, and he's living in Toronto. And his parents didn't know what he did. They don't know what service management is. And many of our people that work in this field, they feel the same way. Somebody asks you what you do, and you're like, I'm in IT, but I'm really not an IT person, and it's one of those things that made me chuckle, because I've had that conversation hundreds and hundreds of times. And, people are like, I don't know what that is. And like, I understand, you know, and they can't spell ITIL if you spotted them the I's and the T's. And so, in the T. And so I'm with you. And also, when you mentioned that the C-level, not only most of the people who are practitioners and directors and maybe vice presidents of service management, one of their struggles is whether it's leadership on the IT side or on the business side, gaining that adoption. And so your perspective, I think, is spot on, not only from the funding, but like change management, change control in ITIL 4. Somebody saying, why do we have to do these? You know, and why
Sorry,
do we have
Jeffrey,
to put these in?
can I interrupt you there? Change
Yes.
enablement.
I said change enablement. We can use all of those. So I just meant, though, those people in those roles are like, I don't know, why do we have to put these in? You know, why do we have to record changes? Why do we have to record incidents if our, you know, because the leaders are believing that it takes time. And I appreciate you correcting me on the ITIL 4 vernacular. And, you know, that's one of the things that I really see in today's world, and we'll get to it, is I'm looking in the next few months. It's that there's going to be this ITIL 4, ITIL V3 clash, because it's a different way of looking at things. And so as we're talking on ITIL, how did you get started on your ITIL journey?
Yeah, great question. I actually didn't start ITIL till quite later on in my life. My background was that of project management, and I mean, that's interesting in itself, being a project manager and not knowing about ITIL. But I worked for a large telco in Sydney, Australia, and fortunate enough that they sponsored or put us through the expert level. And the trainer, who was quite a young chap, was explaining the different accreditations that you can achieve through ITIL and Axelos. And we talked about the expert level, and then he was on, I'll never forget it, he was on the whiteboard and drawing the steps. And then he got to the master level. And I said, me being me, I said, oh, could you explain that? Because he brushed over it very quickly. And he said, don't worry about it. It's too hard. No one ever does it. And that was a catalyst. I'm like, right, I'm going to do it. And so that was my journey. And it literally took me 2 years, because I had to finish the expert level before you can go on to do your master's, and then apply to do the master's. That in itself was not an easy process. And I was fortunate that Qantas allowed me to use the airline as my case study. And I always say it, and I don't say this lightly, it has changed my career and my life. And, you know, some people say, oh, she's too much in ITIL. And, but, you know, it's true. I wouldn't be where I am talking to you today if I hadn't done my master's. And I encourage, you know, anybody in our field to do it. It's not easy. And I often say, Jeffrey, that, you know, I didn't go to university, so I don't know how to write in an academic style, which is what the master's required. And there was many occasions where I'd give up, because it just was, I found it too difficult to do. And I came to the fork in the road, and I said, I can either give up or continue. And I made a decision to continue, and I sought the help of a lecturer at a university in Sydney, and he helped me write it. He taught me how to write properly. And even those skills I still use today. You know, he often said to me, Katrina, you write how you talk, talking to your friends in the back of a taxi. You know, no facts backed up or anything like that, just all very emotional. So now, you know, I'm very conscious of how I write, and making sure it's factual based. And, but obviously, you know, learning about service management at a organization, enterprise level, not just IT, really was a fundamental shift in my understanding and appreciation of how difficult it is for service management. It is hard, and one of your next questions leads on to this about best practice, and, you know, I challenge that, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, but generally that's the background of why I became a ITIL master. And yes, there's only 3 of us in Australia, and we think about 60 globally. Yeah. And Jeffrey, may I ask you, do you have any motivation to do the ITIL master?
I do. I would enjoy it. I dig all that stuff. For me, it's, you know, when I was younger, I didn't really love learning and writing. And when I started writing books, what was really funny is one of my former coworkers, he said, you talk like you're right. And I was like, is that good? Is that bad? You know, because we all use different ways we describe things. And I probably describe things overly much just because in my brain, I like people that paint those pictures for me. But the one thing from your story that I took that I is like, if we want Kat to do something, we just tell her it's too hard, and she will take on that charge and say, I can do it. And, you know, I would love to. And, you know, especially as it gets to, I believe that ITIL is a framework. It's not a hammer to be used. It's a framework to be implemented and used per organization to create the outcomes that that organization needs. And that's why I would really enjoy increasing my tool belt, so to speak, with that framework so I could use it better to help people out, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's again, one of the main reasons I did it, and the benefit of it. Because I remember I said to somebody, I'm like, oh, I actually know what I'm talking about. So I feel I have a level of authority now. And certainly if I don't, I have access to amazing people, you know, at Axelos that I can refer to, and with that now a network also, you know, that you would know also. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, highly recommend the pain. There's a lot of gain to do your masters.
I will put that in. My next one's the transition from V3 over to ITIL 4. And that's what I'm looking forward to. In fact, I'm this big of a nerd, so people can laugh. It's okay. When in my previous employer, one of my employees one of my team went through the foundations and sent me their book. Fine. The ITIL 4 book. I'm on an airplane reading it and then seeing how well I do on the test, you know, on the sample test, just because, you know, and so I digested the book in like 2 or 3 hours and on a, you know, US airplane flight, and then saw how well I did on the test. I did well, but you know, it's that challenge to say, how can we do better? So I have this view, and it'll come up in a little bit later too, but I think COVID will delay the implementation, the widespread implementation of ITIL 4 in big corporations. You know, many of these organizations are set up in V3, and now they have tight budgets. How would you recommend somebody implementing ITIL 4? Just like you corrected me, rightly so, on the change enablement versus change management. But, you know, given all the constraints, how would you recommend somebody making that big shift in their organization?
Yeah, I think it sort of raises another point, Jeffrey. Again, in my opinion, I feel ITIL 4 is more of a philosophy, way of working, rather than as much as what ITIL version 3 was a framework, which, you know, we do argue and debate that we took it too seriously and too close, you know, too prescriptive with ITIL version 3, even though it was never meant to be. I think most companies did. You know, this is the process and this is best practice and this is how you do it. Turn left, then right. Whereas ITIL 4 is not like that. And as you know, I also specialize in human-centered design, and that is a philosophy. And this is where I see a great connection between the two. And Akshay from Axelos, again, who I'm sure you know, was asked this question when we were in Vegas at the Pink Elephant Conference this year. And Akshay's response was to, how do you start with ITIL 4? And it's guiding principles. And I totally agree. And also ITIL 4 is really more about the customer experience, and think about the customer and then design the processes. And at the risk of offending our the ITIL version 3, you know, people that are very passionate about it, I don't think that we really did think and understand the customer. We said we did, you know, we deliver value, we used to say in ITIL 3, but we didn't. And as I said, when I started to learn about human-centered design, and we have the concept of personas and customer journey map and empathy and, you know, understanding the problem before we jump into the solution. And, you know, I used to think, why don't we use this in IT? And because we don't. We, you know, as I said, our concept of a customer was an end user. We might have had a VIP, you know, and that's about as far as it went, or someone with admin rights. So it wasn't about them. It was about what they did. And I think ITIL 4 has introduced that concept in a great way. And that, to me, is how we can start implementing ITIL 4 without a great deal of expense, of a slow shift in change of how we design, support our services.
That's a great answer. And to even pile onto that, and V3, most organizations, when I mention they're set up for V3, it really means transition operations and maybe a little bit of improvement. But when we look at V3, how many companies did demand management well, or the BRM role well? Very few. And so it's been my experience that when you mentioned C-suite, I think it's spot on, because nobody asks the customer, hey, what is it you're trying to achieve? What outcomes? You know, the old adage of IT saying, here it is in blue, and the customer said, I want it in green. And well, here it is in blue, and there's always that disconnect for me, and I'm passionate about us trying to deliver, because those in IT do not want to admit this, but I think that's 100% true, and I welcome your feedback. But the people in the business are the ones that pay the IT salaries. They're the ones that fund IT. So we might as well try to understand what they need, what they want, what outcomes they're trying to achieve, and then work towards that. That should be our starting point in how we work forward. I welcome your feedback on that.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jeffrey. And again, I look back when I was working in operations, and I'll just say something very quickly, because I think it's quite funny how you said how we used to implement ITIL, and Troy Dublin from Pink Elephant. I don't know if you've heard of the ITIL dance that he's created, and the ITIL dance is incident problem change stop. That's all that's what we do, But yes, as I said, I look back when I was designing support models or contracts. This is best practice. This is what we do, and I use that example at Qantas, where if you're a boarding agent or check-in agent and you're trying to board 300 passengers, and airlines have very strict KPIs, board your passengers from door opening within 20 minutes, and the scanner breaks down, they're simply not going to call the service desk. And again, understanding personas and designing services around those personas is something that we just did not do. And what happens is that in this example, the persona are very resilient, so they'll find another scanner that works. And then what happens is we end up with a lot of broken equipment at airports, and people go, oh, IT, they're useless. So, and this is where, I think that in ITIL version 3, we didn't do this very, very well, of understanding the customers and designing the services for them. And, it might initially have taken a bit more time and a bit more investment, but certainly, we continually, I guess it keeps us gainfully employed, Jeffrey. We used to continually do continual improvement, continual service improvement. And it's like, well, let's get it right in the first place, and do real continual improvement, not things that we should have done correctly.
I'm with you. And so I would say continual service improvement in many organizations, like a dog chasing its tail. Sometimes it runs faster and it thinks it's close to the tail, but the tail's moving just as fast. And, in my previous organization, when we were rolling out a project, we did personas for training. And I thought that was a great idea, right? Because ITIL training or trainings for a new initiative should be based upon personas. And we should think of those personas as the consumers of our services, the consumers of what we're doing, and then say, how can I create X, whether it's training or a solution that helps them achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And you mentioned the human aspect, and there's so much of the human aspect that goes unsaid. We see things from a tool side or a pure ITIL framework side, and there's so much of the human. Which brings me to my next question. When somebody goes to your website, they see, and I'm going to use air quotes here, challenging IT best practice, redefining your service management, that one quote, plus they also see designing for people, not processes. Why did you choose these?
I guess similar to what I mentioned earlier, Jeffrey, is that I was a really big advocate of arguing with end users or, colleagues about, this is best practice. This is how you do it. And, as I said, best practice dictates that if you have an issue as an end user, you contact the service desk. That's best practice. Best practice dictates that the service desk analyst has to contact the end user 3 times before the ticket is closed. That's best practice. And that's what I challenge. For example, why does the service desk analyst have to call an end user 3 times? Yeah.
Arbitrary.
Once. Because I did a lot of research, obviously, with my master's. And what I found was on average 40% of a vendor's service desk analyst, so we're talking level 2 essentially, so highly skilled people, were spending nearly 40% of their time chasing end users. Mm-hmm. Now, where is the value in that? And a lot of times, do end users really care either? And if they did care, they'd had the courtesy, if I can be so bold, to call back. And we'd make the process easier to make that call back. But again, chasing up users that, especially at an airport, that typically don't have a desk phone or a phone, typically work shift work, and typically don't really care. Where is the value, as I said, of the analyst spending all that time chasing it up? So that's what I mean. I'm challenging it. And I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not saying sometimes that it can't work, but challenge it. Don't go, oh, this is best practice. Let's do it this way. And as I said, I've negotiated, fairly hefty contracts based on best practice. And I, again, in my opinion, think a lot of behaviors that we see in IT with service providers are spawned from the contracts. And if we go back to the problem space and we look at that, I think there's a great opportunity for improvement. In answer to your question, that's why I challenge it, because I think I said to you, Jeffrey, in our pre-interview, before COVID, when I had the opportunity to travel the world and speak at conferences and train in person, I'd always get my audience to put on a Post-it note, what do you think the business thinks of IT? And 98% of those Post-it notes, and I've got proof, I've got a pile of them at home, are negative. Mm-hmm. IT is too complex, too slow, they don't understand our business, all over the place. And that makes me really sad. It really does. Because as I said, I'm in operations, and we don't want to feel like that. We want to go to work and feel that we're contributing to business outcomes and making people's lives better and easier. But our perception of the business is not like that. So it's not working. So that's what I'm saying. Challenge it. And I'm happy to be challenged on that. Yeah. Would you agree with what my thoughts are, Jeffrey?
I am. I think a lot of it's arbitrary. I think we assign best practice to a lot of things, not just in IT, and we have to look at situations on an individual basis. Many companies, that 3 maybe should be 6, and others it should be 1 with the chat box. And I have 2 teenagers, and I can't color them in the same brush on almost anything. How am I going to say this is one best practice is good for the tens of thousands of organizations around the world over time, that it won't age? Some companies mature faster than others. Some have better resources than others. I'm right there with you on the challenging, just because how can we paint, the brush so widely? Is that kind of where you were thinking?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. But I also think, in fairness to, say us, that, we've been born and bred a certain way. And we look at big organizations like banks and airlines and finance companies, that they do use design thinking. They do personas. They do customer journey mapping. They absolutely do. And here in IT, that are supporting these large organizations, we don't do that. And that's what I mean. Like, I find now in reflection, it's very ironic. And again, this is not a slight or a criticism, but when I tell this story quite often, but when I was doing my ITIL Masters, and you know, yourself, Jeffrey, in ITIL version 3, we had very, you know, thick, hefty books, and they were terrific, great content in there. And I, like you on the plane, I had to read them all. But and you know, you read about value or delivering value to our customers, etc. But in all those books, and I think there's like 3,000 pages, there's not one picture of a human.
Yeah.
And so when we're designing it, I think, you know, because we were not, it was not in front of sight about, you know, a human and a person and a customer and what they're doing and how they're feeling and what motivates them. We just didn't think about it that to a large extent when we designed our service models and wrote contracts, etc. And I just think that's quite like a poetic little story. And hence, in ITIL 4, you know, I've had the privilege to write the storyline that appears throughout all the books, publications about Axle Car Hire. And the idea of that is to just, you know, I'm not going to say brainwash, but just think about, you know, people and how they feel. And as I said, what motivates them, and make sure that, you know, as you said with your children, that you're thinking about the whole array. And so I guess in summary, what I'm trying to say is that we weren't set up for success in our career. And I think ITIL 4 is now changing that. And that's what I think is terrific. And so us folk in IT and IT operations will have a different perspective and more empathy on the design of our services.
And I love the answer. And I was also thinking about the need for organizational change management within IT and how that's so missing when we're trying to put through change enablement, changes that are going to be big impacts to our business customers. Why are we not having those conversations early on? Or something's down, you know, we put in changes at the wrong time of day and it impacts the customer, where we could have just had a nice, easy conversation and say, how can I work this around you? You know, from the persona's point of view, or even the organizational change management. You know, that's where I really am with you on this. And you're so focused on the people aspect of IT and IT service management. I was going to ask you the obvious question of what led you down this path, but was there a defining moment that you said, aha, we have gone too far to this technical, this beat somebody over the head with the rule book? Because we like rules. You know, we in society, we like being told, this is good, this is bad, do this, you'll be good, right? We like that. But it comes at a cost of the human side, and I think that's what you're saying. But was there a defining moment that you said, we've gone too far?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a bit of a story, so I hope you don't mind.
Oh, yes.
My profile on LinkedIn said I was a service design manager at Qantas, because in ITIL version 3, as you know, we had the life cycle, and I worked in service design and service transition. And my profile said things like, you know, I designed services to ensure return on investment, to ensure customer satisfaction, and, you know, all these things. And a college in Sydney contacted me via LinkedIn, and they said, based on your profile, we think you'd make a great lecturer on human-centered design. And I'd never heard of human-centered design. So there was a mix-up, if you will, of ITIL service design and human-centered service design. And that's how it started. So, and the academy is called Academy XI. They're located in Sydney. And they took a big leap of faith. And I taught a little bit of ITIL in their courses. But I think most importantly, I was sitting through the course with my co-lecturer, Stephen Graham. And I'm like, why don't we use this in ITIL? I'm like, wow, you know, the students had done a lot of research. You know, we actually used Qantas as a case study. We did baggage handling and, you know, what happens when your baggage gets lost. And we did the whole end-to-end journey and using a bag as an example. And I remember, like, the students drew, it was visual. And what we do in IT is we get up Visio and we do a process map. Whereas here I'm like, oh my gosh, like, And it told such an amazing story that was really easy to understand about what goes wrong, where it goes wrong, and there was not one swim lane in sight. And that's really how my journey started. It was that wow moment, like, why don't we use this in ITIL? Yeah,
we should. And we should, right? And,
you know, Jeffrey, throw it away.
You mentioned the bags. The throw it away is what happens to my bag, but that's a different story. I've never flown Qantas. All right, as we wrap up, I have two great questions for you. Since you're an ITIL master and author, you're an expert. In 5 years from now, hopefully we're done with all this COVID nonsense and there's not COVID-23 by then. We look back at the introduction and implementation of ITIL 4. What will we notice is the biggest shift in the way IT organizations see service management? Because when we went from ITIL V2 to V3, it was a big shift, you know, moving towards a little bit of a view of the business customer. What will be this on ITIL 4? And it doesn't have to be a by the book answer, but what's your thoughts from your experience?
Well, my thoughts on my dream and aspiration is that when I do, as you said, when this is all over and I'm presenting at conferences again, and I ask my audience to write on a post-it note, what do you think the business thinks of IT? They're going to say, they're fantastic.
That's they understand 92%. It's down to 92% disapproval rating, right?
Oh, 100%. 100% post-it notes will say IT are fantastic. That's what I think.
Oh my, I appreciate your ambition in this, because you know, those that are close to us probably aren't even 100% in my favor very often. All right, last question. This one I think is another good one. Pull out your crystal ball, look far into the future. What will ITIL 5 look like? What will be the advances, the new aspects in ITIL 5 or V5, whatever it's called? Maybe you have insight that I don't, but what do you think it'll look like?
I don't know if I'll still be working. I think all of our community, Jeffrey, will have retired and will be lying in the sun in Florida or the south of France. And our technology will be completely different. And look, you know, to be honest, I don't know what IT is going to look like in the future and whether there will be an IT department, and maybe, you know, ITIL will be renamed to something, you know. I don't know. It's you know, the rate of technology and change is you know, very, very frightening at the best of times. But I think, you know, ITIL 4 is going to be with us for a long time, and that's the idea of it. That's ITIL 4. This is now service management that will continue to evolve and, you know, improve, continual improvement. Yes. Along those lines, and that's how I see the future, is that we are working better with the business. And as I said, ITIL 4 has certainly put us in great stead for that, and it will just evolve into and as I said, I'd like to say philosophy rather than a framework.
So let me give two thoughts on mine. I think we're going to have technology throughout the enterprise, so it'll be more of enterprise service management than IT service management. That's just, technology's everywhere, it's being used by everyone. Even the shadow IT will have to adopt some type of framework. And second of all, I expect security to have a larger role, because now it is throughout all of our organization. So security processes, security roles will have to be intertwined with service management. That's just, you know, a security incident should be viewed the same as an incident of a break fix. You know, I expect us to make that kind of jump in maturity. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I also think security and how we think we handle it today will be very different in 5 years' time. You know, there may not be anything as a security incident anymore, because, you know, the technology is so amazing, you know, that it can be, we can do, you know, preventative measures to stop incidents of that sort.
You're a dreamer, aren't you? Because there's a lot of people that are nefarious trying to do bad to each of us. In the IoT world, as it interfaces, just one aspect, interfaces with service management, scares me, because people are trying to, not to go way off topic, make Peloton bikes and washing machines at hotels, make those into configuration items. And now we're like, okay, how do we secure them? How do we treat them in a organized, methodical manner? blah, 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 blah. And so that's where I was going. So our audience, I want to plug this one more time. Go visit Katrina Macdermid's podcast, her website, follow her on LinkedIn. This has been awesome. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully my audience has. Let me turn it over to you, Kat, for any closing remarks.
Again, Jeffrey, I'm honored to be your first guest. Yeah, I can't express enough to thank you for the opportunity. And I agree, I've really enjoyed this. Time has just absolutely flown. And likewise, I hope our audience has enjoyed the podcast. And thank you for plugging my website. And I look forward to any questions that your audience may have. More than happy to answer. Yeah, so thank you again. And I look forward to speaking to you shortly.
Thank you very much. And also, let me say this, if any organization's needing ITIL 4 training, ITIL 4 guidance, Kat's your woman. And so now through COVID, our technology's better. I'm sure she can deliver that training through Zoom or some other mechanism. Contact her if you have questions about ITIL 4, how to get started on your journey, any of that sort of thing. And so I think a lot of her, as you all can tell from this conversation, and so please look her up. And Kat, thank you once again, and have a great day. And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts. And we're back with closing thoughts. A big thank you to Kat for being our guest number one, our guinea pig. She set the bar really high, didn't she? And so stay tuned for our next guest. We'll announce that in the coming days. I wanted to wrap up with 2 points, follow up on our conversation with Kat. Number one, companies will be slow to adopt ITIL 4 because organizations are still set up according to ITIL v3. Think about how your organization handles service operations, how that interacts with your service providers, external, if you have any. And ITIL v4 is really going to be a different mindset for many organizations. So then when we layer in the COVID stuff on top of this situation, think of the shortage of finances, shortage of people resources, all of this, it's really going to hinder that adoption. And second of all, and this is a point that I want to make often around service management as a whole, and I appreciated Kat's bringing up the human aspect. And it's the human side of service management is underappreciated. It's underserved. Many people, many organizations are tool-centric, and that's great. There are some awesome tools out there. But humans are needed to fund the program, to interpret the data, to code the platform, to build bridges with our business stakeholders, to help us understand what services we have and negotiate the SLAs, to build processes. And you see where I'm going. It's on that list is ongoing. It's endless. And so since humans are needed in those ways, there's just a shortage of ways to help those people. So we at Service Management Leadership want to be there for you. You can contact me. You can go to our website, www.servicemanagement.us. You can look Jeffrey Tefertiller on LinkedIn or company page. But we want to be there to help serve those service management leaders in this way that building up their own resources and people. How do we help mature our processes? How do we get from here to there? That's what we're here for. And lastly, this platform, this podcast is here to serve in that same way. Those shared experiences, how can we help our fellow people across the globe in similar circumstances? How can we help them be successful? This is Jeffrey Tefertiller. Thank you once again to Kat for being our first guest. Thank you for being with us as an audience. I know you'll be excited for our second guest and our third. We have quite a few lined up, and it's really exciting because they're all different types of conversations and stories, and I'm looking forward to it. And you can tell I'm excited. And so I wish you a great day, and thank you once again.